Well, hello there! So glad that I get to talk to you.
Oh boy, here we go.
Let's cut to the chase. Would you like to take a look at our hot new live action remake?
Okay, you know what? Listen here. I know that you're just doing your job and I'm doing my job, but I'm honestly getting tired of you coming here to give me some crap movie to watch just so I end up spending hours on making a review saying that it wasn't worth it.
I'm sorry?
Come on, we've done this song and dance number before, and you clearly haven't given me your best. Besides, I've already talked about your new movie a bunch of times, and from the backlash that caused, it was definitely more trouble than it's worth.
What are you talking about?
Your hot new live action remake? I already did a review of Lilo and Stitch.
Lilo and Stitch? But that's a Disney... Oh! I get it now. Oh, wow. Okay. I see what's going on. This is all a misunderstanding. You must be acquainted by my identical twin brother at Disney. No, you see, I am actually someone different. I represent Universal Pictures.
Universal? But didn't you just say that you have a live action remake?
I did.
Then what the fridge are you promoting? What?
It's time, Hiccup.
Yeah, this was unfortunately inevitable. We now have another live-action remake based on an animated classic. But unlike the others, Disney has nothing to do with it. Actually, maybe it's debatable to call it a classic. Not due to its quality, but because as of the release of the remake, the original How to Train Your Dragon is only 15 years old, which makes it the most recent animated feature to get this remake treatment. At least before Moana takes that title. Also, even though I'm personally not a fan of this trend, I know that I haven't been the harshest critic towards these live-action remakes. For me, they have been, at best, kinda hit and miss. There are those that completely failed to recapture the magic of the original with their new take on the animated version, like Snow White, and others that, even if the changes were a downgrade, they came out generally okay, like Lilo and Stitch. But while I could see some of the good they can do, it doesn't change how they all almost never stand well on their own right. And I always come out preferring to stick to the animated originals without the need of revisiting the remakes. And in the case of How to Train Your Dragon, I've seen nothing from the ads or the trailers that show me confidence that this wouldn't repeat Disney's mistakes. I'd even say that they haven't shown me anything that could be noticeably different from the original.
Pain. Love it. Oh, great. I'll let him in.
Speaking of How to Train Your Dragon, I'll state now that I consider myself more of a casual fan. Mainly because I'm only familiar with the main trilogy, and I haven't experienced any of the additional stuff from the franchise like the shows. Although I did hear the main series is pretty good, but I can't say the same about its Paw Patrol imitator Rescue Riders, or its weird spin-off The Nine Realms, which brings the dragons to modern times.
We have to keep the secret to protect the dragons.
We're surrounded.
Someone's coming.
Didn't I mention that I'm afraid of heights?
But if I may recap my thoughts on the first movie, I'll admit that I find it to be the weakest of the three. Especially with how the story lacks originality, and Jay Baruchel's performance as Hiccup makes the character feel annoying.
Keeping this much raw Vikingness contained, there will be consequences!
I'll take my chances.
However, this does not mean that I find this to be bad at all. In fact, I did find more appreciation for it over time where its strengths really outweigh the flaws. On top of the beautiful animation, this has some of the best world building from DreamWorks, as it educates audiences all about their version of dragons, how the Vikings' relationship with them changed, and the variety of species featured, all presented through the heartfelt bond between Hiccup and Toothless. Sure, I think the sequels are better, and the second is my personal favorite, but the first is not far behind as it is still a very solid picture.
Alright, I admit it. This is pretty cool. It's amazing.
I understand how it sucks to see that fan favorite features from DreamWorks Animation are no longer safe from these remakes, But we have to face the fact that despite the internet's sheer hatred for them, they are still popular amongst the public. Sure, not all of them work at the box office. Some can financially fail, like Dumbo and Snow White. But for the most part, they don't just become successful. They could come out as some of the biggest hits of their time. I mean, we just saw Lilo and Stitch become a major success. And to go back a few months prior, do you remember when social media was filled with all those memes of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 destroying Mufasa on its opening weekend? I mean, yeah, they were both successful, but those reactionary internet bros who made those memes took an L in the long run. But the point is, it was only a matter of time that other studios want a piece of that gold that Disney's been getting and turned their own animated features into live-action remakes. I mean, of course Universal's next with their vast collection with DreamWorks and Illumination, and I am not looking forward to see who's next. I mean, I'm just saying, let's all hope that Sony doesn't get any ideas. But when it comes to this remake, even though it's debatable if they should, could you even bring How to Train Your Dragon to live action in the first place? Well, this film proves that yes, you definitely can remake How to Train Your Dragon into a live action movie. And it was able to achieve exactly that. In fact, it literally took the animated film and transformed it into a live action picture. And this is exactly what's wrong with this movie.
What?
You go first.
No, you go first.
This is not just a typical live-action remake like Disney regularly does. This is a true shot-for-shot remake that is 99% identical to the 2010 animated feature. Even if it's almost half an hour longer, there are no new scenes, no new significant characters, no major updates to the familiar ones, nothing was removed. It is all just about the exact same movie. I understand the idea of being faithful and respectful to the source material, and there is an audience who wants to re-experience their favorite movies but with a new look, yet this film really puts those to the test where it is faithful to a fault. As I was watching this, I even thought that hiring one of the original's directors, Dean DeBlois, might have been a mistake because, as much as I admire his talents, it deprives the remake from even having a different artistic approach to the familiar story. It's built to be so much of the same that I feel like it overshadows the efforts put onto the remake itself. I mean, what's the point of the craftsmanship when the main intention of the feature is just to reinvent the wheel?
I decided to revisit How to Train Your Dragon because I want you to feel the thrill of flying on top of a dragon.
Yeah! An example of what I mean here is with the score. One of the most praised elements of the trilogy is the music by John Powell, and in the remake, he returns to provide that same Viking tone to really add to the film's immersion and epic mood.
It's interesting to come back to material that people really like. People really respond to these tunes, and so he doesn't want to disappoint by omitting any of them.
And yet, it's hard to admire what he's composed in this because he was just doing the same thing that he did in the animated film. It's like when Hans Zimmer did the score of the 2019 remake of The Lion King. Sure, it's technically great, but that's because he was just repeating what he did amazingly before. The music isn't that spectacular when they didn't do anything new compared to last time.
If I've done my job right, people will think I haven't done anything different at all.
And since it copies the 2010 film almost exactly, it carries over many of the same problems as well. One of the criticisms I've mentioned before was how the plot is among the movie's weaker traits. That is one of the less original aspects of the feature due to being dependent on tiresome tropes to move the story forward. From the protagonist's dead mom, well, technically, to the need of the father's love and pride, to the unnecessary goal of winning the girl, to the humans versus nature narrative where the mission is for the two to stop fighting and find peace among each other. Thankfully, the execution on the world building and the heart does make it engaging to follow along, but it is noticeable that the story is built out of recycled materials. And in the case of the remake, I'd argue that even if it's the same, It's also worse because it had an opportunity to fix some of those problems and have a more original approach to the plot, or even fuse in elements from the book that the whole franchise was based on in a similar style to the 2016 Jungle Book remake, making it more interesting and give the movie some surprises along the way. But without it, not only does it share some of those same problems, but depending on how much you know the original or how fresh your memory is of it, the remake is completely predictable from beginning to end.
Thanks.
There is one thing about this movie, though, that ever since it was announced, I find the idea to be so perplexing. And that is the fact that this is a live-action remake of this computer animated feature. Now, it is one thing to go and remake a computer animated film, but it's with this one in particular that's weird to me. I mean, the big selling point is to see the dragons on the big screen, right? So is the plan with this remake to turn these CG dragons into CG dragons? This is where the movie finds itself in this weird paradox. The remake had the task to not only tell the same story, but also to recreate the dragons the same way that the animators at DreamWorks did in the original. When it comes to Disney's remake so far, the decision of adapting their hand-drawn classics at least gives the live-action versions a noticeable visual difference in order to stand out from its source material and make the experience feel fresh with how it's telling a familiar story in a new way. With How to Train Your Dragon, on the other hand, as it is still a big Hollywood motion picture, the fact that it heavily used CG in order to bring these dragons to life, along with other effects, makes it feel like even the visuals and how they were made are almost identical to the animated film. Not to mention how the cinematography is also guilty of that same copy-paste technique, where even the shots themselves can often be the same.
Toothless. I could have sworn you had teeth.
Toothless. I could have sworn you had teeth.
But when it comes to these updated dragons, I'll say that on their own, they are fine. They're well animated with how they present their abilities, how they fly around, their personalities, and the traits that make them distinctly different from each other. However, I find that they look a bit off with their transition from the animated film to this. I get that they're supposed to look more realistic to fit in their live-action environment, but it feels like they had an unfortunate trade-off in order to do so by exchanging their stylistic design for an abundance of textures to the point that it could sometimes look a little too cluttered. And what makes it even weirder is that, despite all the dragons who needed a design change to become a live-action version of themselves, Toothless is the exception. Yes, he was also given some extra layers of textures to have some realism on him, and I get that it's more of a business decision to maintain his familiar look so that it's easier to market the picture, but there's something about it that feels like it throws off the movie's aesthetic where everyone is supposed to be real, yet the main dragon can still be a cartoon.
Maybe they're not as bad as we think they are.
I know that the Lilo and Stitch remake also did this by staying true to the designs of the animated film with their CG aliens, but at least all the characters there stay consistent by sticking to that style. Sure, some look extra weird with their additional textures, but their animation all have a good balance between being realistic and animated. But when the main dragon of the film doesn't follow the rules and go with a different style than everyone else, that's when the inconsistency can take away from the immersion of the experience. And it's not like you can't make a realistic Toothless. It was already done back in 2012 with the Live Spectacular, and the redesigns they did on the dragons, including Toothless, looks great. Again, as dragons on their own, they look good. But as dragons from How to Train Your Dragon, they just don't look right. Also, it's not just the dragons where the transition from computer animation to live action feels counterintuitive. I'd argue the same thing about the environment around the characters. I'll say now that the film did very well to bring the Isle of Berk to life. The production design, the costumes, and the sets all feel like they were able to recreate that familiar island that is populated by Vikings with a dragon problem, complete with the same color palette, Norse architecture, and the use of nature to have it feel like a place where dragons could inhabit. And yet, like the rest of the picture, it's hard to admire the artistry when it doesn't feel like anything changed from before. It's not like it's bringing Burke out of the screen, nor did it transform differently from animation to live action like it would for a remake based on a hand-drawn film. It turned a 3D environment for a movie into a 3D environment for a movie. The materials may be different, but it offers the same function we already had before.
The village, I think it was 15, 20 houses. It really looks alive with Vikings running around in chaos.
But there's gotta be something different about this, right? I did say that this is about 99% identical to the original, so there must be something that's holding it back from going the full 100 that isn't just the live action aspect. If that's the case, then what's that 1% that makes it different? Well, if I have to find that thing that is different compared to the animated film, it would be the Vikings and how the actors portray them. I'll say now that those changes are generally minor, but let me start this part off with a big surprise. I must admit that I think there is one thing that this remake did that is an improvement to the original, and that is Hiccup, played here by Mason Thames. Like I said before, I am not a fan of Jay Baruchel's voice acting in the original. Sure, he was great in the sequels when Hiccup was more mature and confident, but in the first movie, when the character was just a scrawny teenager, Baruchel leaned a little too much on always sounding whiny. For the most part, his acting in the animated film gave Hiccup the same appeal as a mosquito flying too close to your ear.
You guys were busy, and I had a very clear shot. It went down just off Raven Point. Let's get a search party out there before—
Stop!
But in the remake, while the character himself remains the same, Thames' performance enhanced Hiccup by scaling back the whininess so that the focus can be more on his personality. His acting alone is already great with how he showed his range and wit in the film, but he also found a way to make Hiccup's awkwardness feel more endearing, thus making him more likable than he was in the original.
You know, because I was thinking, we have a surplus of dragon fighting Vikings, but do we have enough bread making Vikings?
You need this?
I'll even add that Nico Parker was solid as Astrid. She recaptured the character's determination and tough nature, while also opening up to compassion when Hiccup shows her the true nature of dragons. She really came a long way after her debut in the Dumbo remake. Not to mention that she also carries the classic tradition of live-action remakes, which is to cause right-wing incels to go on senseless racist rants just because the movie acknowledges that a woman of color exists.
In case you forgot, our parents' war is about to become ours. Figure out which side you're on.
As for the other teens training alongside them, the actors were good in their roles, but the characters are just one-note comic reliefs that each carry their own running gag or two throughout the film. I'll even say that they did give one change to Snotlout where he always desperately tries to get his father's approval, which of course adds nothing to the movie. But then you have the main adults of the film, and I think they may be the weakest actors here. Of course, the remake pulled a similar stunt to 2019's The Lion King by having the father of the original come back to reprise his mighty role, which in this case is Gerard Butler as Stoic. However, I can't help but feel like his performance is somehow more cartoony than he was in the actual cartoon. Sure, I get he's a Viking, but compared to before, the over-the-top nature takes away some of that fatherly side that he had last time.
They've killed hundreds of us!
And we killed thousands of them!
It's not the animated me. I'm actually going through this emotional journey.
As for Gobber, casting Nick Frost sounds good on paper to match the character's comedic tone, but in practice, it gave him a disappointing downgrade. It's as if all that charisma that Craig Ferguson established in the trilogy was scrapped and leaves Gobber to be less funny and more mean-spirited. Safe to say that he doesn't lighten up the mood during his scenes.
The monstrous nightmare!
Firepower 15.
The terrible terror!
Attack 8 minutes off!
Will you stop that, you big bag of wool?
And you know what? I think that's the other actual difference between this and the original. The fact that it's now in live action takes away the charm that only animation could deliver. It's not just the visual aesthetic that is lost, but also some of that lighthearted tone that makes the experience more fun, and the full immersion of being in this new world where you're flying with dragons. Even during all those scenes where the Vikings had to combat them, or when Hiccup is flying around with Toothless, the sensation they deliver don't hit as hard as they did before because of the limitations of live action. It ends up holding itself back from achieving that sense of wonder that only animation could pull off because animation doesn't have to be set in any form of reality. When a story is made for animation, you can't expect live action to do the same thing and achieve the same results. It's very interesting how we got two remakes based on Chris Sanders and Dean DeBlois animated films released so close to each other, yet their outcomes are completely different from one another creative-wise. And the real fascinating part is how they bring up a great discussion about live-action remakes. Of course, we all talk about why we don't like them, but the big question in this case is, which of the two is the worst thing a live-action remake could do? Is it to take the risk of making some changes to the story that could most likely make the movie worse like Lilo and Stitch? Or is it to play it safe and be the exact same as the source material to the point of possibly feeling unnecessary like How to Train Your Dragon? I get that it's a tough question to answer, and people will most likely be split on this. But if I may put my opinion on this topic, based on what I've seen from both films, I think the latter is probably worse. I agree that whenever these remakes do any changes, they end up hindering the picture more than they could improve it or at least be well executed on its own. Heck, it can happen that some changes are so bad they could stir quite the controversy. Regardless if they only do some changes like Lilo and Stitch and The Little Mermaid, or a lot to the point of being totally different from the original like Snow White or Maleficent, most of their attempts fail and they cause the remake to look like a total downgrade from the originals. But at the very least, those remakes try to do something new. They try to update what was done before in order to deliver an experience that can be both fresh and familiar. Because even they know that being in live action alone is not enough to justify their existence. And by doing so, they don't feel like they want to replace the animated films they're based on, but to coexist with them by being a different version of the classic. Again, a lot of them fail, and sometimes fail hard, but you can't blame them for trying. And that's my problem with the How to Train Your Dragon remake. There was no effort to try something new with the picture. This is not just Universal's take on a live-action remake. This is their version of 2019's The Lion King. Actually, no, even that film did more to be different from its original than this. 2025's How to Train Your Dragon is actually more like 1998's Psycho, a remake that puts all of its efforts to be the same as the film it was based on, where it ultimately makes itself feel meaningless. I know that all I've been doing in this review is compare this to the 2010 film, but with the way this was built, it's kind of impossible to not do so when it's incapable of functioning without following the exact same steps that the animated movie did. Is the remake itself well made? I mean, technically yes. Some of the actors like Mason Thames are good, the CG is alright, the score is awesome, the sets look nice, and it delivers all those same great fights and dragon battles. And yet, it's difficult to appreciate all the hard work put into it when their purpose is to create something that feels completely hollow. It didn't recapture the heart and the spirit of How to Train Your Dragon. It more stole them from the animated film and claim them as their own. This is why I don't think I could recommend this to fans of the original. You're pretty much paying for something you already have at home. If you're going to watch a movie on the big screen, why not see something that's willing to take the risk of trying something new instead of a feature that only wants to be something you've already seen before? And by the way, just a quick side note, if you enjoyed this review, then give this a like and subscribe to my channel. You can also go extra and support me on my Patreon so that we could take flight to see what other movies await us. Honestly, the more I think about the How to Train Your Dragon remake, the more I consider it one of the weakest for its lazy attempt of just copy-pasting a whole movie. That's why I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 10 and the Animat seal of garbage. However, even with my rating, I know this will have its audience, and I understand if there are those who will come out enjoying the film, especially kids having their first taste of the franchise with this. For those who don't have a strong memory of it, or have never seen the animated film, I'm sure you'll have a better time with the remake than I did, and that's perfectly fine. Maybe it's my mistake for watching the original prior to the remake, because by doing that, I unexpectedly end up watching the same movie twice.
Thank you for nothing, you useless reptile.